And it'll be a few seconds before the recording takes. Then we can get started then. Okay.
Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Maureen Meredith. I work for the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department. Tonight is a virtual community meeting for NPA 2021-0025.02. Please let us know who is here in the chat box. If you could type your name and organization if you're associated with one. I will use this as the sign-in sheet for the meeting. Please mute your microphone if you're joining by phone and turn off your video if you're participating online to save bandwidth, and this meeting is being recorded. So how to participate today. The speech bubble in the menu bar at the bottom or could be the top of your screen will open the chat box where you can type in questions at any time. Please limit general comments until the end of the Q&A session. After presentations, you can click on the raise hand icon to be called on to speak. For telephone participants, you will be given an opportunity to ask questions. We will alternate between people on the video chat and people online, and we'll call the telephone participants by the last 4 digits of their telephone number. So as I said, my name is Maureen Meredith. I work for the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department, and I do all the plan amendment cases for the city. And Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Mark Walter, the Principal Planner with the Housing and Planning Department, and I'll be moderating tonight's conversation.
And Amanda?
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Swore with Drenner Group. I do have our team. I'm the applicant for the project. I do have our team on here, and we'll introduce them after Maureen's presentation as we begin our presentation.
Okay, thank you. So here's my contact information, and Kate Clark is the zoning case manager. If you received the notice in the mail, this information was in the notice you received, and I will also have it at the end of the presentation if you need to refer to it again at the end of the meeting. So the agenda tonight, I will go over the basic case information, how to participate in the process, why is there a plan amendment application, what is a future land use map. I'll do a basic presentation on the plan amendment and zoning request. Then Amanda will do her presentation. Then we will open the meeting to questions and answers. So the property address is 7715.5 West SH 71. It's 13.62 acres. The case number is NPA 2021-0025.02. The project name is 7715.5 West State Highway 71. The request is to change the future land use map from single family to mixed use office. The associated zoning case number is C14-2021-0130. The zoning request is to change the zoning from LO, that's limited office neighborhood plan, and RRNP, rural residential neighborhood plan, to GOMUNP, which is general office mixed use neighborhood plan for residential development with up to 450 multifamily units. This information taken from the application. The property owner applicant is Stephen Simon, John Simon, and Barbara Simon Berner. The agent is Drenner Group, and Amanda Swore is the agent's representative. So guidelines for group discussion. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time during this meeting, but we ask you to postpone your general comments to the end of the Q&A session. After the staff and applicant presentations, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol on the menu bar. Telephone participants will be able to speak during the Q&A session of the meeting. Attendees will be muted upon arrival and through the staff and applicant presentations. Then staff will open the floor to answer questions in the chat or by attendees raising their hands to speak. Similar questions may be grouped and answered together. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking for the sake of sound quality and clarity of conversation. If you're having connection issues, please turn off your video until called upon to ask your questions. So this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the speakupaustin.org/NPA website. This is the website. If you participating online through the link, this is the same website. You can email or call the case managers with any questions or comments that you have. However, the written comments will be added to the staff case reports. You will receive a notice in the mail, the date and time of the Planning Commission and City Council hearings. If you live within 500 feet of the property, the notice will have instructions on how you can participate in these public hearings. So why is there a neighborhood plan? Neighborhood plans are adopted by City Council as amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. The city charter requires zoning changes to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Most neighborhood plan cases are amendments to the future land use map, and most neighborhood plan amendment cases have an associated zoning application. So this map shows the areas in blue that have City Council approved neighborhood plans. These neighborhood plans have a plan document that have the vision, goals, and recommendations for the planning area. And they also have a future land use map. Future land use map, these colors represent broad land uses. For example, the property right now has yellow single family land use, and the proposed land use is mixed use office. That should be mixed use office, and that is kind of a reddish brown color. So this chart shows how the broad land use categories and the colors represent the typical zoning districts that can be found in them. For example, property is zoned SF3, it has a yellow land use, and with the GOMU mixed use office, it would turn to the reddish brown color on the future land use map. So this is the property. You can see the northern part already has the mixed use office land use. The southern part has the yellow, which is single family. This map shows the neighborhood planning area from our property profile. You see it's vacant. This is the Google map that just shows some of the surrounding uses of the property. This is the future land use map for the planning, for the NPA planning area. That you can see that northern part has the mixed use office land use already, and the southern part has the yellow, which is single family. This is the zoning area. You can see the top portion has rural residential, the southern part has limited office. This map just shows sort of a zoomed out view of the Imagine Austin growth concept map that shows these darker red areas as regional town centers and neighborhood centers within the comprehensive plan. And this map just shows how the Oak Hill, how the property sits within the Oak Hill Activity Center. This map shows the public transportation and proximity of the property. That ends my presentation. I will stop sharing my screen and Amanda can start hers.
Awesome. Thank you, Maureen. As I said, my name is Amanda Swore. I'm with Drenner Group. We are the applicant on the project. Thank you all very much for taking the time to spend some of your evening with us. On the line, we do have people to answer questions that I can't. So from my office, Kate Kaniski is here. And then we also have Josh, and I swear I saw Matthew, with Kimberly Horn, who are the project engineers, and then Jason and Travis are with Morgan Group, who are the developers of the project. I'm going to let Jason say a couple of words about Morgan Group, and then I will jump into our presentation.
Yes, thanks, Amanda. As Amanda noted, I'm Morgan's Central Region Development Partner. I'm local here in Austin. We're a third-generation multifamily development company. We take extreme pride in what we build. We primarily own our communities long-term, and we're really excited about this project. We've assembled a great design team. We've been through 17 iterations of a site plan, and we've worked with Parks and Watershed on many of those iterations, and I think each time it's gotten better, and are really pleased with the progress that we've made. And I'd also echo Amanda as well. I appreciate you guys spending this evening with us.
Thanks, Jason. I do want to apologize now. I am still getting over being under the weather and I am coughing quite a bit. So I apologize if I have to mute in the middle of a presentation. Please give me a little bit of grace. I am just thankful that this is a virtual meeting and I know that lots of people are dealing with the same thing. So let me get this presentation rocking and rolling. Is that
Yes.
visible?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So let me make sure I can see it all. Okay, now I can see it in the presentation. So as Maureen mentioned, this property is known as 7715 and a half West SH 40 or SH 71. Properties do not get a formal address assigned to them at zoning. They don't get a formal address until site development permit, which is why the neighborhood plan amendment tract is still designated as a half address. This, as Maureen mentioned, we are here today as part of the neighborhood plan amendment application process, but there are additional cases that are filed with the project that I want to make sure that I go over because they are important to delineate how this all goes together. So there's the neighborhood plan amendment case that Maureen mentioned. There is also the zoning case that she mentioned, but the piece that wasn't mentioned is also the restrictive covenant amendment case that is on file and is going forward. All of these cases will go through the public process together, which is why I want to make sure that I am giving everybody a full picture of what these look like. See if it will advance for me. There we go. So we, as Maureen alluded to, we actually have two pieces of property. We have what we are calling tract 1 and what we are calling tract 2. The tract 1 tract is not part of the neighborhood plan amendment application process, nor is it part of the zoning or the restrictive covenant amendment process. It is only part of the rezoning because it does not have a restrictive covenant on it. And it is already designated as mixed use office as part of the future land use map. So this tract 1 will be developed under current code, which will mean more as I talk forward. Tract 2 is known by some as the Simon tract. This tract 2 is subject to all three of the applications that I mentioned. It is subject to the restrictive covenant amendment application, the future land use map amendment application, as well as the zoning amendment application. These tracts are both still owned by the respective families. Both are under contract to be sold to Morgan Group. So I know that there has been some questions on how they tie together. They are still individually owned. They are under contract by Morgan Group. If this project were to go away, there's no guarantee that the properties would ever go back together. There's a high likelihood that they would develop on their own. So with that, the beginning of this is going to follow a little bit of what Maureen said. I just want to provide a little bit more explanation. So as mentioned, the northern part of the property today has the mixed use and office designation, with the southern part having the single family designation. Our request is to amend the bottom part, the southern part of the tract, to mixed use office to provide for a consistent future land use map designation on the entirety of the property. As the property sits today, the portion of the site that has the single family land use designation actually isn't even zoned for single family and doesn't allow residential as a permitted use. So today, the northern part of the property, or tract 1, or the Kirchmar tract, which you'll hear it called all different things by different individuals that are involved, is zoned RRNP. Our rezoning request is to the GOMUNP, which is consistent with the future land use map that was adopted as part of the Oak Hill neighborhood plan. The LONP, our request is to go to the GOMUNP, which will allow for the development of residential on the entirety of the property. So just to recap, we have the two tracks. One is subject to all 3 applications. One is only subject to zoning. These tracks total 22.16 acres respectively. Tract 1 or the Simon tract is 13 acres and tract 2 or the Kirchmeyer tract is 8.8 acres today. Again, with a designation from single family to mixed use office. Pardon me, and a rezoning from LO NP and RRNP to GO MUNP. The third application that I mentioned that I want to spend a little bit of time on is the restrictive covenant amendment application. This restrictive covenant is only applicable to what we are calling tract 2 and what is known as the Simon tract. As many of you are aware, for people that have been in the area for a long time, in 1985, the city of Austin undertook what they called the Oak Hill Area Study. And it was on the larger Oak Hill area for properties that were being annexed into the city of Austin. As a result of the Oak Hill Area Study and with the initial permanent zoning of many of these properties, many of them have properties in the Oak Hill area have restrictive covenants that were put in place in the 80s. And these restrictive covenants grandfather the properties to rules and regulations of the code from 1981, not to code today. On the screen is a copy of the Simon restrictive covenant that was put in with the original 1985 rezoning of the property. The Simon property in itself contained 2 tracts at the time that it went through annexation and received its restrictive covenant. It had tract 1, which is what our property is. So even though it is tract 2 in our plans known by the city, it is tract 1 in the Simon restrictive covenant. Tract 2 in the Simon restrictive covenant is not part of this property. Tract 2 in the Simon restrictive covenant is the single family property that is currently being developed to the south of this. We understand that there has been a lot of trouble, for lack of a better word, and some issues associated with that tract 2's development. A lot of hardships that the neighborhood has had to live through and deal with. I want to make sure that I'm clear that even though that tract 2 is part of this restrictive covenant, it is not part of this project. It is not part of this development. This development team is in no way, shape, or form associated with that tract 2, with that project that's under development. This is a completely separate project that just happens to be together with a restrictive covenant. None of the changes that we are proposing to make on our tract 1 have any implication on tract 2. Just because they're in the same restrictive covenant, they are standalone properties. So I just want to be really clear on that because I know there's been a lot of discussion regarding that. So the tract 1 of the Simon restrictive covenant, we do have a restrictive covenant amendment application on file with the city of Austin to amend the regulations that were part of that original restriction. So for tract 1, those restrictions were a maximum impervious cover of 65%. So today, by right, the Simon property has an impervious cover of 65% that it can develop without any zoning regulations or community input, and it could develop by right at an impervious cover of 65%. It does have, however, a lower buildable square footage amount of 146,000 square feet. So what you would likely end up with in a scenario, in a by right scenario, would be, given the LO zoning, you would likely end up with an office building with a very large surface parking lot because of the allowable impervious cover. The item C on this restrictive covenant is really where the exceptions to current code come into play. So this is where the property is subject to the city of Austin's 1981 code and not subject to any, oh, pardon me, I went one too fast. And is not subject to any of the SOS water quality measures. It's not subject to current tree regulations or other environmental regulations. And so just to recap, this is only applicable to tract 2, to the Simon tract. It can, it does have these development rights by right that exists today. And we are proposing to come in and modify those, which I'll talk through. As I said in the beginning, and I do want to reiterate, tract 1 or the Kirchner tract is subject to current code. It is not part of this restrictive covenant. So I'm happy to answer questions when this is over. I'm just wanting to make sure that that's as clear as possible. So now to get to the proposed project, I have pulled off all of the titles and the blocks on this image so I can make it as big as possible. Since we are in a virtual space, I can't put it on a big screen to make it easy. So I'm going to talk through the labels. As Maureen mentioned, this presentation is being recorded. This presentation is public record. So we are happy to share this information following the meeting. Maureen will have a copy of the presentation. You can receive it to her. My information has been given and would look forward to continued conversations. So I don't know that I covered this earlier, but this project has been in review with the city of Austin for several months. It has been in review with the city's environmental department for over half a year. As Jason mentioned, we have gone through over 17 different site designs and site plans. I know there is a website that has been put together. However, unfortunately, the information in the website is not accurate and up to date. What's on the screen today is the current iteration that we have been working with city staff on. It is the version of the project that has been reviewed for compliance with city regulations. It is the version of the plan that we are basing all of our restrictive covenant amendment applications on. And as part of our discussions with city staff, we've put in a tremendous effort to create a project that far exceeds what could be built by right today. So what we are proposing is a multifamily residential project. I know that there has been some rhetoric regarding, a high density project. What we are proposing, as Maureen mentioned, as part of our application has a maximum of 450 units. Right now, we're likely somewhere around 430 units. With the size of this property, however, that is less than 20 units per acre, which is less than the city's MF2 designation, which is 23 units per acre, which qualifies this as a low density multifamily project. So let me walk you through what you're seeing on the screen. I'm going to start from right to left or north to south. I believe you can see my cursor, so I'll try and walk through with what I'm talking about. First off, I want to point out the lot line that I mentioned earlier. We do have 2 tracts that we are working to develop together as part of this project. That line sits right here. So this tract 1 is the Kitchener tract that is subject to all current regulations by code today. This tract 2 is the Simon tract that is subject to the restrictive covenant that we are proposing to modify that has the existing entitlements by right. So starting from north to south, this area in light green here is the portion of the property that will be dedicated to TxDOT at the time of site development permit as future right-of-way. So this will allow for the Highway 71 improvements that are contemplated. At this point in the project, when the 71 project moves forward at this point in the sections, this will be a frontage road situation when the 71 project is complete. Moving past the future right-of-way, the area that you see in dark green that surrounds the proposed development consists of 8.2 acres. This 8.2 acres will be a public park that will be dedicated to the city of Austin. The this area of town is one of the underserved parkland areas. So we spent an extensive amount of time with the city's Parks and Recreation Department to come up with something that would be a true amenity to the site. So as I mentioned, this property totals 22 acres, and of that, 8.2 acres of the property will be dedicated to the city of Austin as a public park. We worked quite a bit with the Parks and Recreation Department on the configuration of the land. One of the things we wanted to be able to address was the proximity of the new pocket park that is being provided in this area, which sits where my cursor is. We wanted to be able to provide a connection, to take something that was, you know, on the smaller side and really connect it to a larger community space. So we've been able to provide a trail, and this was also really important to the Parks and Recreation Department, a trail that is a 0.7 mile hike and bike trail that will circle the site, and again, completely publicly accessible because it will be dedicated to the city. As part of the project, though, we will build it. We will build the entire loop, as well as any other ancillary improvements, and as well as some public trailhead parking that will be along 71. Although we anticipate that most of the use for this park will come from the neighborhood. The other important component for this project and having the parkland located in the configuration that it is although we are not going to be providing vehicular access through the property, which I'll talk more about later, we did want to make sure that there was the ability for pedestrians and bicycles to get from the south of the site to the north of the site to be able to utilize the enhancements that are going to be provided when SH71 is complete. So moving into the proposed project, again, starting at the north, this area here is where our water quality and detention area will be. I will talk more about the water quality and the environmental features that our project is proposing. But I know that I've seen some questions floating around on where that area will happen and what that sizing will look like. So that has been accounted for in this northern part of our property. And unlike most zoning cases, our calculations have actually already been reviewed and verified with the city because of the restrictive covenant amendment. So I'm happy to talk more about that if there's questions as we go through, but just wanted to make sure to point that out for reference. As we talk about the proposed project, you'll notice that this project is quite a bit different than anybody that's been to the website that's been prepared about this project. That was an older version of the project that had not been fully vetted with city staff. So what we are proposing here really breaks the project into 3 different components. I have seen also some correspondence about 5-story buildings, etc. The tallest buildings on this property will be 4 stories. They have been situated as far to the west as we could provide them, adjacent to the property right here, which is already zoned CS and already has a 60-foot height maximum allowance. Again, our buildings are not anticipated to be 60 feet. They are 4 stories and under. When working with city staff, we worked really hard to address parking, because parking has a direct correlation to impervious cover. So this this western building will have a structured parking garage versus initially the project was looking to surface park. We took really careful care with this parking garage to ensure that it was fully screened from a lighting perspective, so that as these future residents come into play, all of the headlights will be contained within the building. The parking garage is also designed so that it is not taller than the building, which you see at some points in time, and fully enclosed. So again, this is a proposed 4-story building. As we transition to the east and some of the properties that currently today have more of a mix of zoning with commercial on the front and residential on the back. We transitioned our buildings down in height. So these are designed to be 3-story buildings with a tuck under basement. There is quite a bit of grade change on this site that I can talk more about as we go through the next pieces of it. The site is being designed so that it works with the grade, not against the grade. So these, again, would be 3-story buildings that have that tuck under basement and are situated in this area to provide the buffer. And then lastly, the future land use map had the southern portion of this site dedicated as single family. So in addition to the park buffer that's there, we wanted to provide a residential feel. So these will be townhomes that are 2 stories that provide that transition throughout the property. And lastly, I want to make sure that I point out this access drive. I know that there's been a lot of question on how transportation will happen, and will there be any access to the neighborhood streets? Where will construction access happen? All of those items. All construction access will come from 71. There will be no construction access that comes to the south of this site. We will be required, and have been told we will be required, to have a connection point to the south. This will only be for emergency vehicular access. There will be no day-to-day access to the south of this site. That I will. I want to go to the next slide. And so lastly, I really want to focus on the proposed modifications that the project is making to the restrictive covenant. So what this outlines is the restrictive covenant that I mentioned in the beginning that has a defined set of parameters that exist today and can be developed by right. And then what we are proposing to modify. With this modification, it is a one-time modification. So if this is approved, the existing restrictive covenant with the rules that exist today would be modified to what we are proposing. When this project is complete, any future project would be fully required to comply with the code at the time that it developed. No grandfathering would carry forward. With the restrictive covenant, if a by right project were to exist or were to be constructed today, upon the next life cycle, that restrictive covenant would still be in place. It would not have terminated. So what we are proposing, I want to hit on a couple of these. From a water quality perspective, the restrictive covenant grandfathers this project to pre-SOS requirements. It would only be required to capture the first ½ inch of runoff. What we are proposing is full compliance with SOS standards from a capture, treatment, and re-irrigation standpoint. When we ran they're called SLAT tools, which our engineers can talk in a lot more detail than I can on, but when we ran those tools, which have been verified by the city for us to be able to talk about this in the restrictive covenant, when this project, if this is approved and this project is developed, we will actually remove more than the site sits in current undeveloped conditions. So this is a big thing. This is also, in my experience, there have been a handful of projects that have gone through this process and redeveloped and worked to come up with a new restrictive covenant. This is the first project that I'm aware of that has been able to achieve full SOS compliance without any continued modifications from a water quality perspective. Drainage, in full transparency, there are some drainage components in the restrictive covenant. Drainage is considered a life safety measure and is required to meet current code regardless of grandfathering status. Impervious cover is grandfathered today to 65% on the Simon Tract. We are proposing to reduce that to a maximum impervious cover of 60%. One of the things that you'll note, though, on the Kirchmar tract is that it is actually below impervious cover. So the aggregate impervious cover for the entire project is well below the 60% that is proposed with the Simon tract. Erosion hazard zones are not regulated. We're not regulated in the 1981 code. We are proposing to provide full and current code from an erosion hazard standpoint. Cut fill was also unlimited as part of the restrictive covenant. This property has over 80 feet of fall on it. If a project was to develop by right, you would likely have cuts in excess of 20 feet, given the way that a project would likely lay on the site. At least that's what our feasibility studies have shown us. What we are proposing is a 8-foot cut and fill limitation on the site under the proposed restrictive covenant. Also really important to note is that in 1981, there was only a protected tree ordinance. There was not a heritage tree ordinance. These properties combined have a total of 42 heritage trees on them. We are proposing full compliance with current code, which is a really big environmental component. And then lastly, erosion control measures were locked in the 1981 measures, and we are proposing to come up to full code compliance. Again, this would all be done as part of the restrictive covenant amendment, and all of these cases run together. So I know I have talked a lot. There was a lot of information. So with that, I am happy to stop and answer any questions that there might be.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. There's one question from Carrie Cardenas. Are you planning to add additional trees above and beyond preserving the trees that are already there?
Yes. And Josh, Jason, feel free to jump in if my answer is not fully accurate, but the property will mitigate trees on site. There will also be landscaping. So we are working to preserve the park area in as natural of a state as possible, cleaning up underbrush, but there's a lot of heritage trees that we have specifically designed the park around to keep them there so that they can be enjoyed by the community as a whole. But then there will be additional landscaping measures that are put into the project, both some in the park, but then in addition, really providing kind of landscaping buffers, et cetera, within the project.
So Amanda, Carrie has another question, kind of a follow-up to that. Do you have anyone working on the team to ensure what is planted, the trees that are planted in the landscaping is native?
Yeah, Amanda, I can take that one. We have engaged Benkendorfer and Associates as our landscape architect, and they're a great, very talented landscape architect, and they are also local in Austin. And that's the design that they do best is the native design. And so, the natural beauty of this site is really important, and I think that we want to augment that with native plants. And not bring in primarily foreign plants that wouldn't be native to Austin. And then just to piggyback on Amanda's answer about the additional trees, we have had our arborist and tree survey group survey every tree that's on the site today. And we are really prioritizing to design around the trees that are there because they're much bigger, more beautiful and more interesting than the newer trees that we would plant. But we will be planting new trees as well all around the site. So it'll be a combination of preserving the trees that are in great locations, and most of our heritage trees are actually in the parkland. So it's a combination of preserving existing trees and then new tree plantings.
Thanks. There's some questions in the chat, so I'm just going to take them in the order that they appeared. First question is from Tom Thayer. What is the total impervious cover for the project as a whole? Also, what are the current height limitations on the property?
Let me answer those backwards. Today, the height limitation under LO is 40 feet, and I'm gonna look at that and make sure that I'm not crazy, because when you ask me, I don't want to be wrong. Yes, 40 feet and 3 stories is the height limitation under the existing zoning that's on the Simon property today. And the second question you asked was, what was the total impervious cover for the 2 lots combined? Is that accurate?
Yes, that's what it says.
Okay. Jason, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. With the amount of parkland, I think that the total impervious cover for both of them is under 40%. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
And we have another question from Emily Anderson. What is the elevation difference between the south and north side of the tract? I think you said 80 feet, or is that east-west?
80 feet. And it's, really the way that the site sits, and again, Josh, chime in if I'm wrong, the site falls quite a bit, and we've really placed the buildings so that they are at the lowest points possible, and we've broken the building up into steps so that we're not creating large cuts, so that we're doing kind of micro buildings within the larger buildings to be able to adjust and work with the grade that is there.
Okay, there's a question here from Danny Anderson. What guarantees do the residents have, I guess the adjacent neighborhoods, that the gated entry onto Little Deer Crossing, Oak Forest will not be opened at a later date?
There's a couple of ways that we can do it. So that's something that we have agreed to from the very beginning. We asked if we could not have it. They told us that you were building it regardless. So we put it in there. It could be a conditional overlay as part of the zoning. It could be something that goes into the restrictive covenant amendment. Either of those are publicly enforceable by the city and could not be amended without a vote by the city council. So this is one of the few instances where we actually have a belt and suspenders. It can go in either or both locations.
Okay. There's another question here from Eric Yurkovich. Why not put the park adjacent to the KB Homes Pocket Park and the buildings on the north part of the property near the highway?
The way that the sites sit out, and is my screen still sharing?
Yes.
I love it when that happens. So with the lot lines sitting where they are, again, this part of the property is required to develop under existing regulations, which means it has a significantly lower impervious cover and is required to meet full code. It's also where the vast majority of the heritage trees sit. And so when we worked with the Parks Department, that was an area that they felt was actually a really lovely area to have. And it also is not, per code, we cannot put additional buildings in that area from an impervious cover perspective.
We have another question from Karen G. It says, what hours, days of construction will this project have?
Oh, that's a Jason question.
Yes, we'll maintain regular, construction hours that are regulated by the city of Austin. So we'll adhere to those construction hours.
Okay. Do you happen to know what they are? I don't know what they are off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
7 to 8, 7 to 6.
I don't know exactly what they are offhand.
It depends on whether it's a night or a weekend. Is where the construction hours sit, but we would be in full compliance and have a local team that is here to be able to address any questions and comments at that. But full compliance, and again, all construction access would come off of 71. None of it would come off of the south side of the property.
We have another question from Emily Anderson. Since it's an 80-foot difference in elevation, how safe would it be for a child to ride their bike down the trail to access the public park?
That's actually something that we've been working with the Parks Department on, and working to make sure that at least one side of the park is completely ADA accessible, so that a pedestrian or a bicycle rider can get from the south side of the property to the north side of the property. We know there's a couple areas that'll likely have some switchbacks or a little bit different grade in them, but we've worked with the Parks Department to ensure, and it'll likely be this north or this west side, that this is completely ADA compliant to be able to allow a pedestrian to traverse the site.
Okay. Question from Carrie Cardenas. What rent range are you proposing for the tenants at this property?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I can take that one. So we have a unit mix proposed of 1s, 2s, and 3 bedrooms on the site. So each one of our units will be priced differently. Currently we anticipate that, rents will, start in the $1,200-1,300 a month range, and then, going up and exceed well over 3,000 a month. So it's a range depending on, the unit type, and, obviously the rents that, we're looking at today are not set. So, the construction on the project will take a while, and then we'll set rents about 90 days prior to opening.
What I would want to just kind of add on to that, if I could, Jason, one of the things that I wasn't able to mention in the presentation is really what the unit mix on this project looks like. So many times you see new projects that come into play that have a really high percentage of 1-bedrooms. This project is proposing to provide over 40% of the units as family-friendly units, which means 2s and 3 bedrooms, which is not typically what you see in the market.
There's another question from Eric Yurkovich. Why not make a wraparound for the 3 buildings on the east side of the property to minimize your surface parking?
That's actually something that we looked into, and Jason chime in if I'm not accurate here. But as we started looking into what that would mean, it actually ends up putting a more intrusive building adjacent to the eastern side of the project, and it doesn't have any impact on impervious cover when you actually have to look at layouts and parking garage footprints and efficiency of it. It doesn't have an impact in this way. The project actually provides a lower step down in a more varied type of buildings. Jason, is that?
Yeah, that is right, Amanda. And for context, the parking garage that's on the west side of the site, that's about as narrow as it can be for vehicular circulation, as cars circle up the garage. So to have a garage of that size plus a building on the east side would push the buildings much closer to the eastern property line, and interfere with the parkland area that we have planned here. So from a site planning standpoint, it didn't lay out well in that configuration.
And it would have required a significantly larger amount of cut and fill. I think I said that. That was an okay sentence.
There's another question from Tom Thayer. Is there a way to have all the buildings 3 stories or less? Height is a concern for many neighbors who live close to this property.
So we looked at a lot of different building heights, and where we ended up with the 4-story building was in an attempt to reduce the impervious cover and the footprints. That 4th story allowed us to make that building actually functional and remove some of one of the additional buildings. Jason, if there's anything you want to add to that, feel free to. But the 4-story, we worked hard to keep that at 4 stories versus the 5 stories that would generally be permitted under the zone.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Okay, I'm going to go through a few more of these questions, then I'm going to go check with the phone callers to see if they have any questions, since they can't exactly type in their questions. Okay, we had the 3 questions. Okay, there's the 3-story question. Okay, the next question is from James Kane. It's the 8.2 acres will turn into a homeless camp. What guarantees it will not turn into a homeless camp? Our neighborhood lost homes due to a campfire a few years back.
That's a great question. So one of the components that we have been working with the Parks Department on is that, yes, we will dedicate this as a public park, but we will construct it and we will likely ultimately maintain it. It is both the front and the back door of our project. So yes, it will be public parkland and it will be accessible to anybody, but it will be maintained by this project so that it doesn't fall into dilapidation.
Okay. Now I have on here showing I have 2 people with phones. And Maureen, correct me if I'm wrong, is it *6 to unmute?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're the individual with this telephone number ending with 1592, if you have any questions at this point, if you would unmute and ask your question. If not, wait a second, and you don't unmute, I assume that you don't have a question. Okay, now the next person who has a phone called in with the last 4 digits are 3313. If you have a question you would like to ask the applicant or the team, you can unmute by hitting *6, and same as the last person. If you don't have a question, I'll wait a couple seconds. And if you haven't unmuted, I'll assume that you don't have a question, and I'll go back to the chat questions. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the chat questions. There's a question from Katie Reisman. Where will the foot access points be located around the park, hike and bike trails?
That's a great point. That's a great question. So there's anticipated to be a trailhead entrance point on this, what would that be, the southwest corner of the project, which will align with the pocket park that's under construction here, and it'll allow it to be one of the, the closest point to the neighborhood without having to continue to traverse in the road to get off of the road and into the park area. So this is anticipated to be one of the trailhead points you would be able to access from the emergency drive. That access point would be on the neighborhood side of the emergency box that would be there. And then there's also anticipated to be a couple of other trailhead entrances on the north side of the property. We have allocated some of our impervious cover at the request of the Parks Department to parking, to have trailhead parking off of 71. So there would be an access point both to the east and the west here. And then there will likely be a bicycle access point of some type, or some type of access point from this loop out towards 71. So there's anticipated to be 3 or 4 locations.
We have a question from Emily McKinnon. $1,200 is a quite low rent for Austin these days, assuming this is for a 1-bedroom. Who is the target renter for this property? Is it meant to be, and they have quotes, affordable?
So I can answer that, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is anticipated to be a market rent project. We are still working through what an affordable component of the project would look like. I think that we will have that more put together as we continue to get to the public hearing portion of the project. But this is intended to be a market rate project.
Okay, the next question is from Katie Reisman. And can you make a 3D virtual model available to the public?
At this point, we don't have a 3D virtual model. Everything has kind of stayed in the 2-dimensional world to date. We have kind of tried to look at what some of the cross sections would look like, but at this point, we don't have a 3-dimensional model put together. That's a lot of the devils in the details is what happens at the site development permit process. With this being the zoning process, we're just not quite there yet.
Okay. You have a question from Betsy Boyd. What access through the Scenic Brook neighborhood are you planning?
0. There will be no access through the Scenic Brook neighborhood unless it is for someone on a bike or a pedestrian that wants to get there. If there were, part of the reason that we were required to put this access point here, if there were to be a fire, something like that, this would open for vehicular access for the neighborhood to have an egress point out through our site, but at no point would we have an ingress point into the neighborhood.
Okay. Karen G, what is the lighting plan for this space? How high will the light standards, how tall the light pole is going to be?
Great question. So the project is going to be subject to the City of Austin's lighting regulations, which require all new lights to be fully hooded and shielded, which means our lights cannot cross the property line. So you might see a stray light here or there, if you had a street light, along one of the roads that's, but they're low, they're going to be lower than, so sorry. They're going to be lower than where the buildings are. Lighting is also one of the big components that we took into account as we worked through the city with the location of the parking garage. We wanted to make sure that in no instance would the neighborhood from the road or from their backyards see any lights in the parking garage, nor would you see any headlights. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's kind of hard to know when someone stops in these meetings.
Yeah.
There's another question from James Kane. Will the whole property have fence lines around the perimeter?
No, it will not. So there will be fencing and landscaping between the park and the project. but the parkland will be open and accessible, which is how the Parks and Recreation Department wanted it to be. So there will not be a large fence up along 71 nor along the south end of the site. The parkland will be accessible to anybody who wants to use it without having to.
You get a question from Emily Anderson. What's the height of the parking garage?
Lower than the building. I don't know the exact height of the parking garage. I just know that it was designed to ensure that it was encapsulated within the structure.
And that's correct, Amanda. I can chime in there as well. So the building at 4 stories, the parking garage will be at 4 stories. So each resident will be able to park on the level that they live. But the top of the parking garage will be under the top of the building. So it won't be visible from the exterior. It's all concealed by the building that wraps around it.
Thanks. From Kyle B. Will the public park include any bathrooms, picnic areas, or play sets or other structures?
It will not have bathrooms. That is something that they generally do not permit in these types of parks that are maintained by the private community, even though they're public. What was the other thing that was asked?
Well, there are going to be any bathrooms, picnic areas, play sets, or any other amenities such as that.
There will likely be some picnic areas. That's something that the Parks Department really encourages. Playscapes are not something that they tend to encourage as much. Those tend to be more on neighborhood types of parks or on larger, more regional parks. But yeah, I would anticipate that you would have improvements such as, you know, bicycle locks, places to lock up your bicycle if you needed to, as well as picnic type areas.
The next question is from Sean D. Johnson. Is this going to be a mixed use with retail, restaurants, offices, or will it all be residential?
At this point in time, it's anticipated to all be residential.
Okay. Another question from Eric Yurkovich. Why not just follow the future land use map and do single family on the south side?
So that's a great question. We have modeled our project to embody the spirit of the future land use map by putting the townhouses there to really provide that buffer as well as the parkland area. The property as it's zoned today wouldn't even be allowed to have single family residential on it. So our component really allows us to have a better spirit of what the future land use map in the zoning anticipated there.
The next question is from Emily McKinnon. How would you say this development is improving the land and lives of those that currently own property / live in the surrounding areas? How does this impact the aquifer?
Let me answer this backwards because that's how my brain registers. When I hear the second question, I can usually jump to it faster. So our project at the end of the day will actually provide a better water quality environment that it sits today in its undeveloped state. So we will be removing more solids and providing better outflow than the property sits today with absolutely zero development on it. And that has been verified by our engineers, signed and sealed, and has been verified by the city's engineers that we are, to quote the Boy Scouts, we are leaving it better than we found it from a water quality perspective. And then the second question is, what does this do for the community?
Yeah, how would you say this development is improving the land and lives of those that currently own property or live in the surrounding areas?
So this will provide, in my opinion, and in environmental staff's opinion, this is going to provide a far better project than could otherwise be built today. If you had a project that developed under the existing restrictive covenant today, you would likely end up with something that had a massive sea of surface parking, likely with storage options on that parking because the impervious cover is so high and the building allowance is so low. You would also end up in a situation where you didn't have any of the water quality or environmental practices that we're bringing into play. This is also a part of the community that is severely lacking in park space. And, we're donating over 1/3 of our property, 8 acres, as a public park to an area that currently has just the brand new pocket park there, to name a few.
Okay. Another question from Carrie Cardenas. I'm concerned about the current wildlife that lives in this space. This will displace many animals and the coyote population that lives here. Is there any consideration to the environmental impact this creates?
Jason, I can take a stab at that. Mark, I caught myself reading a question while you were talking.
That's
It's
my
real
job.
life. When there's so many coming in. So I think the question was, what is the impact to the wildlife that happens here?
Yes.
Jason, you want to talk about construction practices?
Yeah, and I can talk about that. And I think, the point that you just mentioned as well, man, is important. The parkland area of the total site is over a third of the site. And the current by right entitlements, would result in more impervious cover and, no park. And so, it would certainly be worse for wildlife displacement. But, again, we have a local construction team that's here in Austin. They employ construction practices that, are environmentally friendly as possible. And I think one thing to note there, as well as Amanda talked about earlier in her presentation, we're limiting the cut fill on the site to 8 feet. So, the amount of rock cutting and things that are necessary for this area will be limited, which is really important to us as we site plan the site.
As well as the preservation of the trees to allow for the habitat to recreate organically significantly faster than it would if it was just new plantings.
There's a question from Karen G. The design looks impressive, especially the area designated for the park. But how can we be assured that the green spaces will be designed, given what we've seen from KB Homes completely clearing all trees and the setback was not as designed?
So one of the unique options that we have as we have this restrictive covenant amendment is it lets us put these items in there as part of the restrictive covenant, as well as the zoning case. And there has been instances where we end up also entering into private restrictive covenants with neighborhood organizations if there are other specific items that need to be belted and suspended in some way, shape, or form. But it will be part of our requirement that this 8.2 acres, we actually have a letter from the city requiring it to be there, in making the change to comply with the tree ordinance as well. That'll be as part of the restrictive covenant. If we wanted to take out any of these are big trees. To take out any of them would require us to go to city council, or doesn't go all the way to city council, go to commission for a variance as part of the public process. So it will all be, the requirements will be outlined in the public documents that are enforceable by the city.
Another question from Katie Reisman. What other properties has the Morgan Group developed in Austin, and how many do you still own?
Yes, good question. So to date, we've developed 2 in Austin. We still manage, and it's part of our current manage and own portfolio, the Pearl Lantana project on Southwest Parkway, not too far from here. And then prior to that, we had developed a project in Tech Ridge. We're currently working on more in Austin and building a local team, but those are the 2 to date.
Okay. And a question from Tom Thayer. What about traffic on SH 71? It seems there will be problems with access for those coming northwest on 71. Right now, they would have an unprotected left turn. In the future, they will need to use a turnaround and quickly get over into the right lane to access the project. It seems like there could be some traffic safety issues.
I can talk to that. Josh, feel free to step in on anything that I am not accurate on. So in the past, you would have done a TIA with zoning, really with as fast as the city and with, the bond monies, and frankly, with COVID, when transportation numbers became not real. And they being the city, started to see that you had all these TIAs that were done with zoning that frankly, by the time a site development permit came, the project was different, the units were different. So staff was having to use resources to re-review them. So a site or a TIA will be done with zoning, but because of the way that the property sits, we have had a lot of preliminary conversations with the city and with TxDOT, especially needing to make sure that we accounted for all of the right-of-way that they were going to need, as well as access points. So I think I mentioned this earlier, that the Simon property does not have any access to 71. given the driveway locations and the proposed improvements, we had to make sure that we would have a valid access point from TxDOT. And so this access point has been approved, preliminary signed off on as far as where it goes. We've also worked with them to know that this will be a right in and right out only. There will not be left hands in or out at the beginning or when it's all said and done. We also know that there will be main lanes and frontage roads here once the project gets going. And we have been told that we will be likely constructing a deceleration lane. An acceleration lane is also possible. That's something that we're not 100% sure on, but the project will do a deceleration lane, and we'll have to fully study its transportation with TxDOT to make sure that it provides safe ingress and egress as part of the project.
Yeah, you touched on this earlier, but Natalie has a question. If the park is being described as a benefit for the people in the neighborhood, why not place it closer to the neighbors rather than next to the highway on the farthest end away from the neighborhood?
We worked with the Parks and Recreation Department for probably 4 months to come up with this design. And so part of the biggest reason that a lot of the parkland is closer to the highway is that is where the heritage trees are. And the Parks Department felt that would create a beautiful amenity for the project and for the public. It is also the area that is restricted on impervious cover. So we don't have the ability under current regulations to put our buildings further to the north and put the parkland to the south. The Parks Department also felt very strongly about the need for a loop around the entirety of the project. When we started this, we actually had more parkland on the south, and as we went through the process, it ebbed and flowed to this design that had been signed off by Parks.
Another question from Carrie. I'd love to know if you're considering any other areas in the city to put your property. Our neighborhood has enjoyed the rural feel within the city. This will take this away. Why not build elsewhere? Why are you choosing to focus on this area?
And I think that's probably a twofold answer, and I can let Jason tag on when I'm done with it. I think the reality is that the property owners today are looking to sell their sites. The families have owned these for a long time, and they are looking to they put them on the market, and they are the properties will be redeveloped. Morgan was able to work with the two property owners to create a better property versus just working with the Simon property, which is frankly the first one that came on the market. And the Simon property would likely be developed today with someone using the restrictive covenant that exists. So Morgan worked really hard to be able to obtain the other property to be able to create a project that benefits this area and isn't just a large surface parking lot. I think the reality is these properties will redevelop, and so we have worked with the environmental office and with the design team to create the best project that we can that has the least impact to the neighbors here versus what could be developed by right and actually provides some community benefits and betterment in the area.
Okay, the next
Amanda,
question.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's well said. That's really what I wanted to touch on as well. And we felt that combining the Kretschmar tract with the Simon tract made for the best development because it had an access point to 71 and had really the square up of the frontage. And so we felt like it was really important not to access the neighborhood. And as Amanda noted, this property would be developed one way or another. It was a competitive process.
Okay. There's a question from Eric. How can you justify disregarding the Oak Hill combined plan, which has been agreed upon by both the city and the residents? The park is only a result of the fact that there was nothing else to do with that tract. Why not just reduce the impervious cover on the Simon tract voluntarily instead of maxing the impervious coverage?
We have reduced the impervious cover on the Simon tract. We have an impervious cover by right of 65%. We have worked with staff to get that down to 60%. We have also not maxed out the impervious cover on the Kretschmar tract. It could be, Josh, nod if I'm wrong, it could be 25%. We're currently at about 15% impervious cover. So we have worked to reduce those impervious cover numbers. Was there a second part to the question, Mark, that I missed?
The park was only a result of the fact there's anything else on
Oh,
the track.
the future land use map. The designation for the mixed use does allow for residential. So what we are providing is consistent with the future land use map on the northern part of the property. It's also consistent with the city's goals to provide more housing that just frankly doesn't exist today in the city, and especially the city's in desperate need of. We have worked to create the townhomes. Again, those couldn't be built today. The future land use map that was adopted that contemplated single family, this property is not even allowed to build any residential today. So we worked to blend the two by still providing that single family transition area in spirit of the plan, but providing, creating the unified district on the entirety of the property.
Okay, the next question is from Kyle B. How much of the parkland is likely to be eaten by the frontage road in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Josh, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong here. So the 8.2 acres does not include the area, like we already accounted for the right of way that's to be taken. So the 8.2 acres is it excludes the right of way that's to be taken. We also worked with TxDOT to make sure that we knew their future right of way plans. Projects have a life cycle. They needed to make sure that that didn't happen. So we are dedicating right of way that is consistent with TxDOT's current and future build outs for all of their planning needs right now. So I would say not likely.
Okay. This is from Emily McKinnon. How long would this development take to complete from start to finish?
Yeah, I can take that, Amanda. We are currently contemplating a construction duration from start to finish of 22 months. And typically, we are within 10% of that. So, 2 years on the outside from start to finish.
Okay. There's a question and a comment from Danny Anderson. If I heard correctly, you said that single family couldn't be built on the track under the current covenant, but you're trying to change the covenant. So to reiterate a prior question with that in mind, why not ask for a change that would allow you to build single family units?
So I want to make sure my words were clear. The single family could not be built under the zoning that exists today. The
Okay.
zoning that exists today is LOMU, which only allows for commercial uses. It does not allow for any residential uses. The restrictive covenant is silent on use, which is, so we are not having to modify the covenant to address use. It only addressed the pieces that I mentioned.
Okay, and I think the second half of the question is why not build single family rather than apartments?
And I can let Jason take some of that, but the reality is that we have worked really hard to create that transition and provide a little bit of single family on that south side. That was only a portion of the property that was even contemplated for single family. The rest of it was contemplated for higher density residential uses, which was evident with the mixed use designation. If it was all intended to be single family, that's what would have been on the future land use map.
Okay, we have another question from Carrie, and then after this, I'm going to go and see if a person who just logged on not too long ago with a phone has a question. But how many? Well, she just made a much longer question. How many units does this plan include? And then the second part is, I appreciate that you've shared your time to defend your case. I would like to make sure that I voice as a resident of this neighborhood that I do not support this effort. We have enjoyed the green space in our neighborhood and is a reason when we have moved here. You'll have to work extremely hard to impress her. So I guess that was more of a comment and not a question, but how many units do you anticipate? I think you mentioned it earlier in your presentation.
So the zoning case as part of the TIA waiver had a maximum of 450. This plan is 430, correct, Jason?
That is correct, and that includes the townhome units as well on the south.
Okay, there's a phone caller who has the last 4 digits of their phone number is 1592. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself by hitting *6. And if not, I'll wait a couple seconds. And if you haven't unmuted, I'll assume that you don't have a question, and I'll go back to see if there's any questions that came in on the chat. And seeing no action to unmute, I'll go back to the chat. From Eric, let me find this, because once you go off, you kind of lose your space here. For Eric, why not do more townhomes?
I can let Jason take some of that, but the townhomes provide a lot larger impervious cover footprints. So to be able to achieve the housing goals of the city, the project has been, made as compact as possible. Providing townhomes to create the vision for the city would result in a significantly larger amount of impervious cover.
And would this, from Emily McKinnon, would this development start after Oak Hill Parkway project is complete? Concerned about the amount of additional traffic at our existing intersection if this is built before that is resolved.
Josh?
I was just looking at the Oak Hill Parkway timeline. Per TxDOT, currently it's shown as 2026 opening to the traffic. So, I mean, Jason, you mentioned about a 2-year timeline upon approval, and we're, really at the beginning of the development process right now.
Yeah, and I do, Mark, I know before you cut off time, I do want to make sure, because I talked a lot in my presentation, but I want to make sure that I let everybody know what our anticipated next steps are.
I'll get to that about 5 minutes till.
Okay, cool. But we are at the beginning of the process, so we have not started public hearings yet. That process usually takes anywhere from 3+ months to go through the public hearing process. At that point, Josh and his team would start the site development permit process. That usually takes about a year. And then you also have the building permit process that happens after that. Sometimes it can overlap, but you're a year, probably and a half from even being to the point where you had full permits to proceed. And then to Jason's point, it would be construction of about 2 years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the best that I can give you our timeline and what we're able to find on the Oak Hill Parkway's status.
So that's basically mid 2025 is when this would be
Best case scenario.
best case scenario.
That's correct.
Okay. Eric has a question. What about the vision of the Oak Hill neighborhood plan? I do not know the vision off the top of my head, but I guess they're asking how does this project does or does not comply with that vision?
I mean, I can say how it complies with the future land use map with the initial designation of mixed use along that frontage, as well as the MU designations that have been added to the other properties in the area. But I don't know all the visioning points off the top of my head either, Mark.
And I guess it's in the plan. I would have to look that up. I skipped a question and unintentionally from Katie. How tall will building 2 be, and will this be apartments? And on my laptop, I can't see building 1, 2, or any number. So
yeah, for reference, so building 2 is on the eastern side of the property closest to 71. That's correct. That building is 4 stories, and it will be residences, apartments.
Okay. And Maureen just telling us that we now have 8 minutes left. So if there's not any questions, you just want to wrap up, and if someone comes in the next few minutes, we can accommodate that. But there's some housekeeping that we need to take care of as well.
That sounds great. I know that everyone is super busy. There's a lot going on in our lives right now. We really do appreciate you taking the time to come to this meeting. Maureen, did you share my contact information? I can
go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay.
I don't think it was on the community meeting notice, but I on the notice of filing.
I will put my information in the chat, and you can reach it from Maureen. These meetings, while they are great that we can continue to have them during COVID, sometimes it is hard to really interact in this type of an environment. We as a development team are committed to continued conversations. I saw that there were some representatives from Scenic Brook. If there is a desire to have a separate meeting, whether that's safely outdoors or whether that's virtual, we are happy to continue conversations as we go through the process. As I mentioned, we are wrapping up the staff review part of the process. We have completed environmental review, which was our last piece. The project will move forward. Given the restrictive covenant amendment, we do have an extra public hearing that this project will go through. So this project will go to Environmental Commission. That will only be to review the restrictive covenant, not the zoning or the future land use map. And then all 3 cases will move together through the Planning Commission and the City Council. The earliest date that we would move forward for the Environmental Commission would be February the 5th. We are still working with staff on what that overall timeline looks like.
Okay. I guess a few more questions popped up and we still have a couple minutes, so I'll gotta go through these really quickly. You talked about the vision of Austin, but their goals have often contradicted Oak Hill. Well, many plans, older neighborhood plans, are not necessarily in complete alignment with the new comprehensive plan. And Carrie is saying, I appreciate you sharing the vision. Katie has this. Oh, if you would, it'd be helpful if the studies you did with the city were made public to see whether they align with the 2008 vision of the neighborhood.
When you say this, if someone can type in, I know we're running out of time, but the studies that we did, all of the environmental studies is all public information. It will all be posted as backup. So all of the studies that we did is all public, 100%.
Okay. And Kyle B, now we have our 5-minute warning. I'm interested in staying updated on the affordability aspect of your plan as that is cemented. I guess just trying to keep the dialogue open.
Like I said, I'll put my information here. If you want to reach out to me directly, I can make sure that you're part of that conversation. We will be working through that, and we'll have something finalized by the time that we get to Planning Commission.
And when do you expect Planning Commission?
I would guess that we are at Planning Commission probably at the end of February, best case scenario, maybe the beginning of March.
Okay. And those, if somebody would want those studies, they are available through the case managers, I assume.
Yes, I saw the question about links. I don't necessarily have links to them, but everything is available through the case manager. Or if you want to send me an email, I can get stuff to you. It's just not, I don't have a website or anything like that.
And for all of these who want to make sure you can get Amanda's contact, her email is aswor@drennergroup.com, all lowercase, run it together. And the phone number is 512-807-2904. And thanking us for that. So, Maureen, do you want to go through what the next steps are in the next 4 minutes or so?
Yeah, so when the plan amendment, the restrictive covenant termination, and the zoning case are scheduled for Planning Commission, people who live within 500 feet will get a notice in the mail with the date, time, and location of the meetings and how to participate. We have been receiving email comments. All those will be added to the staff case reports. If you want to touch base with me on the exact Planning Commission hearing date, since it has been finalized yet, that will be no problem to reach out to me and or Kate periodically to check on dates. City Council date has not been determined yet. The Planning Commission hearing date will have a virtual option, so you don't have to drive into downtown to participate. So that the instructions will be in the public hearing notice. Anything else? You're muted, Mark.
Not a meeting till somebody does that. Could you throw up your contact information, Maureen, and we'll get this last question and I think we'll call it an evening. From Emily McKinnon again, will you be building a back road for the influx of residents to take, since this is planning to be built before our 290 traffic intersections are added? And I think, there's gonna be a road out the back to, other than your fire requirements for fire safety.
No, we have made the commitment from the very beginning that we will take no access to the south. All access, regardless of at the time of construction, will come off of 71, and that will be our burden to bear.
And that'll be some kind of a crash gate or something similar to that the fire would have access to.
We anticipate that it will be more like a Knox box, so that it's still aesthetically pleasing. So it won't be a big ugly thing that the neighbors have to look at. We will make it so that it is, whether it's bollards or something like that, it will be such that it can only be accessed by fire emergency, not by residents.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming out tonight and spending some time with us to learn more about this project. We appreciate you made the time to do that. And here is Maureen's contact, and so is Kate's contact information. And it's on Maureen's is on the notice. So If you have questions or you want to submit comments to either Kate or Maureen, this is how you can contact them. And with that, I would like to wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you all for your time. And if additional questions come up, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are more than happy to continue the community engagement.
Okay. Well, thank you all, and have a good evening. I'm going to stop recording the meeting now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.